Ένας εκατομμυριούχος ταπεινώνει μια καθαρίστρια μπροστά σε όλους, σίγουρος ότι εκείνη ήταν ασήμαντη. Αυτό που αποκαλύπτει εκείνη δευτερόλεπτα αργότερα κάνει τους διευθυντές να τρέμουν και τη σιωπή να κυριαρχήσει στο κτίριο. Και ο άνθρωπος που την διέταξε να σωπάσει ανακαλύπτει ότι το μεγαλύτερο λάθος του δεν ήταν στους αριθμούς. Πριν συνεχίσουμε, εγγραφείτε στο κανάλι μας και πείτε μας τα σχόλια από ποια πόλη μας παρακολουθείτε. Η Αθήνα ξυπνούσε κάτω από έναν γκρίζο ουρανό που έμοιαζε να αντανακλάται την ψυχρότητα των γυάλινων κτηρίων της λεωφόρου του executive bathroom mirror. 52 years old, perfectly combed grey hair, a piercing gaze that dissected people like someone analyzing spreadsheets. His corporate empire, Sterling Industries, turned over billions annually producing industrial components for the domestic and international markets. Every screw, every part, every contract represented a number in his calculating mind. And numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't fail. People, however, did. Marcus left the bathroom and walked down the executive hallway, his Italian leather shoes echoing on the polished marble floor. There were 20 minutes left until the most important meeting of the quarter. Japanese and German investors were about to sign a $300 million contract for the supply of special components for the automotive industry. Everything had to be perfect, impeccable, under absolute control. That was when he saw her, a woman in a navy blue uniform, her hair tied back in a simple bun, kneeling on the floor near the conference room. She was running a damp cloth along the edges of the baseboard, and the strong smell of cleaning products invaded Marcus's nostrils like an insult. He stopped in the middle of the hallway, his eyes fixed on that presence that simply shouldn't be there. Not at that moment. Not on that floor. Behind him, 3 directors who accompanied him also stopped, noticing the sudden change in his posture. Marcus took a deep breath, containing the irritation that was beginning to boil. He approached the woman with firm steps, each strike on the floor an announcement of a storm. The employee noticed the approach and looked up. She was young, perhaps in her early 30s, her face tired but serene. She stood up slowly, holding the cleaning cloth in one hand. "Do you know what time it is?" Marcus questioned, his voice low but cutting like a sharp blade. She looked at the wall clock at the end of the hallway. 8:40, sir. And do you know what happens here in 20 minutes? It wasn't a question. It was a statement loaded with contempt. The woman kept her gaze steady. "I imagine it's an important meeting." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. "Important. $300 million at stake. International investors about to arrive, and I find you here, spreading this unbearable smell across the entire floor. Do you have any idea what this represents?" The directors behind him exchanged uncomfortable looks. Some employees passing through the hallway slowed their pace, pretending to check documents, while observing the scene from the corner of their eyes. Marcus took a step forward, his voice now louder, projected so that everyone around could hear. "People like you should know your place. This floor is not for cleaning during business hours. There are schedules, there are rules. Or are you incapable of understanding something so simple?" The silence that followed was heavy, awkward. The woman did not lower her eyes. She did not cower. She remained there, with a calmness that bordered on disconcerting. "I understand the rules, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice firm but respectful. "And I also understand that sometimes there are things more important than blindly following protocols." Marcus arched an eyebrow, surprised by the response. "More important," he repeated with evident sarcasm. "Enlighten me, then. What could be more important than respecting the hierarchy of a company that, by the way, pays your salary?" The woman took 2 steps to the side, pointing discreetly toward the meeting room whose glass doors were partially open. Marcus followed the gesture with his eyes and saw the large mahogany table, the organized documents, the projection screens prepared. Everything seemed in order. "You are going to present the new sealing component for high-performance engines, aren't you?" she asked, without taking her eyes off him. Marcus frowned. "And how do you know that?" She ignored the question and continued, her voice now lower, almost an urgent whisper. "I passed through that room 15 minutes ago. I saw the documents open on the table. I saw the technical report for batch TP7392, and I saw something you should have seen before calling this meeting." Marcus's heart accelerated, but he kept his expression impassive. "You're delusional. Get out of here before I call security." She didn't move. The batch code highlighted in red on the report, TP7392. That batch went through pressure and temperature tests, but the results were inconsistent. 3 samples failed the thermal resistance test above 180 degrees Celsius. If the investors demand detailed technical specifications, and they will, you will have no way to explain why this batch was approved for large-scale production. The silence now was absolute. The directors looked at each other, their faces pale. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that batch. He knew the numbers, but he didn't know the details she had just mentioned. "How do you know this?" he asked, his voice stripped of the arrogance of minutes ago. "Because I read the full report, and because I know how to recognize when something is wrong." Marcus took a step forward, now intrigued and alarmed. "Who are you?" She gripped the cleaning cloth tighter, as if it were an anchor. "My name is Rachel Sullivan. I've been working cleaning this building for 8 months, but before that I worked in materials engineering for nearly a decade." The revelation dropped like a bomb. One of the directors, Edward Sinclair, took a step forward, his voice full of skepticism. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to sabotage the meeting. Marcus, don't listen to this. It's a desperate attempt to get attention." Rachel turned to Edward, her gaze calm but firm. "You are the director of production, correct? Then you know that high-density polymers lose 20% of their structural strength when exposed to repeated thermal cycles above the glass transition point. You also know that the quality control report for batch TP7392 was signed only 3 days ago, but the tests should take at least 2 weeks to be properly completed. Someone was in a hurry, and hurry in materials engineering usually results in catastrophic failures." Edward turned pale. Marcus looked from Rachel to the director, then back to her. "Prove it," Marcus ordered, his voice now devoid of any contempt. "Go into the room and prove what you're saying." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then placed the cleaning cloth on the janitor's cart nearby and walked toward the meeting room. Marcus and the directors followed her. Inside the room, she went straight to the table, flipped through the organized documents, and found the technical report. She pointed to a data table, then to a handwritten note in the margin. "Here, 3 samples showed premature plastic deformation. This means the material cannot withstand the promised specifications. If this component is used in high-performance engines and fails, the consequences could be severe. I'm not just talking about financial loss, I'm talking about safety." Marcus took the report and read it carefully. Every word of Rachel's was confirmed before his eyes. He felt anger rising, but now it wasn't directed at her. It was directed at whoever had allowed this to happen, and deep down at himself, for not having personally verified it. Edward tried to intervene. "Marcus, this is an exaggeration. These tests are just precautions. There's nothing wrong with the batch." Marcus raised his hand, silencing him. He looked at Rachel, truly seeing her for the first time, not as an invisible cleaning lady, but as someone who had just saved him from a potentially irreparable disaster. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice low. "Why is a materials engineer cleaning floors?" Rachel held his gaze for a long moment. "Life changes, Mr. Sterling. Sometimes choices are made for us, and sometimes we do what is necessary to protect the ones we love." Marcus didn't respond. He simply took out his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel the meeting. Tell the investors there was an urgent technical issue that needs to be resolved before we proceed. Reschedule for next week." He hung up and looked at Edward. "I want every report on batch TP7392 on my desk in 1 hour, all of them. And I want explanations about this accelerated approval." Edward opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus's expression silenced him. He left the room quickly, followed by the other directors. Marcus was left alone with Rachel. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision he had just made. $300 million delayed, reputation at risk, furious investors, all because of a woman he had humiliated minutes ago. "You saved me from a mistake that could have destroyed everything," he said, his voice heavy with something he couldn't name. Shame, perhaps, or respect. Rachel picked up the cleaning cloth she had left on a chair. "I only did what was right, Mr. Sterling, regardless of who I am or what I do." She began to leave, but Marcus called her. "Rachel!" She stopped and turned around. "We need to talk, not now, but soon. There is something very wrong happening here, and I need to understand what it is, and I need your help." Rachel nodded slowly. "I will help, Mr. Sterling. but on one condition. What? That you stop treating people as if they were invisible. Because no one is. And sometimes the people you ignore are exactly the ones who can save you. Marcus didn't answer. He just watched as she left the room, returning to the hallway where it had all begun. He stood there, alone, surrounded by documents and blank screens, feeling for the first time in decades that perhaps he didn't know as much as he believed, and that perhaps, just perhaps, there was more at stake than numbers and contracts. Outside, New York City remained grey and indifferent, but inside that glass and steel building, something had begun to change. 3 days had passed since the cancellation of the meeting. 3 days in which Marcus Sterling could barely sleep, reviewing reports, confronting directors, and trying to understand how such a serious failure had gone unnoticed. Or worse, how it could have been deliberately ignored. The meeting with the investors was rescheduled for 2 weeks later, enough time to resolve the technical problem, or at least that's what he hoped. On Thursday morning, Marcus summoned Rachel to a meeting in his private office. The message was delivered by his assistant, Claire, a middle-aged woman who had been with him for 15 years and who, for the first time, looked at him with an expression that mixed surprise and discreet approval. Rachel arrived punctually at 10 o'clock. Marcus was waiting for her, sitting behind his solid mahogany desk, surrounded by computer screens and piles of documents. He gestured for her to sit in the leather armchair in front of him. She hesitated, still wearing the navy blue cleaning uniform, but accepted. "Thank you for coming," Marcus began, his voice less authoritative than usual. "I know you have your work to do." Rachel crossed her hands in her lap. "You asked to talk, I am here." Marcus took a deep breath. "In the last 3 days, my team has reviewed all the reports for batch TP7392. You were right, completely right. 3 samples failed the thermal resistance tests, and yet the batch was approved for production. Someone signed the release without following standard protocol, and now I need to know who and why." Rachel kept her expression neutral. "And what does that have to do with me?" Marcus leaned forward. "You saw something none of my directors saw. You read technical data that isn't part of your job, and you have knowledge that doesn't match your current position. So I'm going to ask the question again, Rachel. Who are you?" She looked away toward the panoramic window overlooking the city. Outside, New York breathed under a weak sun, trying to break through the morning mist. When she turned back to Marcus, there was something resigned in her eyes. "I graduated in materials engineering from MIT, she began, her voice calm but heavy with memories. "I did my master's at Stanford, focusing on high-performance polymers. I worked for 3 years at a German automotive components company, then returned to the States to lead a research project at a multinational. I was good at what I did, Mr. Sterling. Very good." Marcus listened in silence, absorbing every word. 2 years ago, my life changed. My mother, Alice, was always a strong, hard-working woman. A retired seamstress, a widow since my father left us when I was 12. She raised me and my brother, Luke, alone. She never complained, never gave up. Until the day something that should have been safe almost took everything from her. Rachel paused, her voice choked with suppressed emotion. She was at home, using a common household appliance, a garment steamer. Something failed. The product overheated, the plastic melted, the steam escaped under pressure. She suffered severe burns on her right arm and the side of her face. She spent weeks in the hospital. The scars remained. She lost part of the movement in her hand, needs constant physical therapy and expensive medications. And the worst part, Mr. Sterling, is that it didn't have to happen. Marcus felt a tightening in his chest. Manufacturing failure. Rachel nodded. The technical forensic report showed that the sealing component was of lower quality than specified. Tests were rushed through. Documentation was tampered with. The company responsible denied everything, claimed improper use, buried the case in endless lawsuits. My mother never received compensation, and I learned that there are people willing to put profit above the safety of those who trust their products. The silence weighed between them. Marcus swallowed hard, now understanding the motivation behind that steady gaze that had confronted him in the hallway. "And your brother?" Marcus asked. "Luke was 17 when this happened. He saw our mother suffer, saw the struggle, saw the injustice. He stopped studying, became resentful, lost. I needed to take over everything. My mother's care, the medical bills, the rent, the food, and trying to keep my brother away from bad paths. I couldn't reconcile a career in research, which required full dedication, travel, endless hours in the lab, with the urgent need to be present and to support my family. So you gave it all up? Rachel smiled sadly. I didn't give it up, Mr. Sterling. I chose my family. I took the cleaning job because the hours are flexible, because it allows me to be close to home, and because the salary, though modest, pays the essential bills. But I never gave up who I am. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing everything. And why work here? In this company specifically? Rachel hesitated. Because I needed to understand. I needed to see up close how the backstage of an industry like this works. I wanted to know if the failures that destroyed my family were exceptions, or if they were systemic. And what I saw here, Mr. Sterling, scared me. Marcus leaned in again. Explain. In the last 8 months, cleaning offices, labs, meeting rooms, I had access to things I perhaps shouldn't have seen. Reports left on desks, conversations leaking through doors, documents thrown in trash cans without being shredded. I started to notice patterns, tests being accelerated without technical justification, batches approved with ignored reservations, impossible delivery deadlines being met in suspicious ways, and always the same name signing the final releases. Who? Edward Sinclair. Marcus felt his blood run cold. Edward had been the director of production for 7 years, a trusted man, responsible for million-dollar contracts. If he was involved in fraud, the implications were catastrophic. Do you have proof? Marcus asked, his voice tense. Rachel pulled a small flash drive from her uniform pocket. I have notes, dates, batch numbers, photographs of documents I found discarded. It's not enough for a formal report to the authorities yet, but it's enough to raise suspicions that justify a rigorous internal investigation. Marcus took the flash drive, holding it as if it were a bomb about to explode. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you go straight to the authorities? Because external reports take time. And in the meantime, defective products continue to be manufactured and sold. Because I wanted to be sure before destroying reputations. And because, despite everything, I still believe that some people, when confronted with the truth, can choose to do what is right. Marcus looked at her, truly seeing her, not as an invisible employee, not as a disposable part in his corporate machine, but as someone who had sacrificed everything to protect those she loved and who still found the courage to fight for strangers who would never know her name. I will investigate, Marcus said, his voice firm, but I need your help. You know the technical details. You know what to look for. If Edward or anyone else is putting lives at risk for profit, I will expose it. But I need concrete evidence. Rachel nodded. I will help, but on one condition. Marcus arched an eyebrow. What? That any investigation prioritizes people's safety. Not the company's image, not the stock value, not the contracts, the people. If we find defective products on the market, they need to be recalled immediately, regardless of the cost. Marcus hesitated. The cost of a recall could be devastating, but the alternative, lives at risk, was unthinkable. He reached out his hand. You have my word. Rachel shook his hand, sealing an agreement that would change everything. In the following days, Marcus and Rachel worked discreetly. He temporarily transferred her to an administrative role, claiming a need for internal reorganization, which gave her access to files and systems without raising suspicion. Together, they began to cross-reference data, review old reports, and compare approval dates with testing timelines. What they found was disturbing. In the last 2 years, at least 8 batches had been approved with ignored technical reservations, all signed by Edward, all linked to urgent contracts with tight deadlines. And in all cases, quality tests had been completed in half the standard time. Marcus confronted Edward in a private meeting, showing him the data. Edward denied everything, claiming that processes had been optimized, that there was nothing wrong, and that Rachel was trying to sabotage the company out of resentment. The tension between them became palpable. 2 days later, an incident almost caused an accident in the testing laboratory. A thermal analysis machine suffered a sudden failure during an experiment, releasing chemical vapors. The technicians were evacuated in time, but the episode raised questions. Equipment of that type didn't fail without a reason. Rachel, who had been in the lab hours earlier reviewing protocols, was questioned by internal security. Edward suggested that she might have violated safety standards or tampered with equipment without authorization. The accusation was serious. If proven, it would mean immediate termination and possible criminal charges. Marcus felt the pressure mounting. The meeting with the investors was 1 week away. Edward was pushing for everything to return to normal, claiming that delays and internal investigations scared off business partners. And now Rachel was being accused of sabotage. He had a choice to make: protect the company's reputation and turn a blind eye, or support the investigation and risk everything. For the first time in his life, Marcus Sterling hesitated, and it was in that hesitation that he realized how much he had changed since that encounter in the hallway. Outside, New York City continued its frantic pace, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding in glass towers. But inside Sterling Industries, a silent storm was beginning to gain strength. And at the center of it, a woman who once cleaned floors now threatened to bring down an empire built on cracked foundations. The week leading up to the meeting with the investors turned into a silent battlefield. Marcus felt the tension grow every day like a stretched rope about to snap. Edward Sinclair had intensified his campaign to discredit Rachel, spreading rumors through the hallways that she was a problematic employee, resentful for not getting a better position in the company. Some colleagues began to look at her with suspicion. Others simply avoided her, fearing association with someone who might be causing trouble. Rachel felt the weight of those looks, but she continued. Every morning she arrived punctually, reviewed documents, cross-referenced data, and looked for patterns. Marcus watched her from a distance, admiring the resilience she showed even under increasing pressure. He himself was changing, and he knew it. Conversations he once would have ended with an order now made him hesitate. Decisions he would have made without a second thought now kept him awake at night. On Tuesday, 5 days before the crucial meeting, Rachel discovered something alarming. She had requested access to the physical archives of the quality control sector, old documents that had not yet been digitized. When she reached the archive, accompanied by an administrative clerk, she found several empty folders. Reports for 3 specific batches, all approved by Edward in the last 18 months, had disappeared. She immediately informed Marcus. He called an emergency meeting with Edward and 2 other directors. The meeting room was charged with tension as everyone sat around the table. "Documents don't disappear on their own," Marcus said, his voice controlled but with an underlying hardness. "I want to know who had access to the archive in the last few days." Edward crossed his arms, his expression defensive. "Marcus, this is ridiculous. Old files get lost all the time. Papers are misplaced, reorganized, filed in the wrong places. Turning this into a conspiracy is paranoia." Rachel was sitting next to Marcus, her fingers interlaced on the table. "They weren't just any papers, Mr. Sinclair. They were quality control reports for specific batches that had technical reservations and were still approved for production, and all signed by you." Edward stared at her coldly. "You have no authority to review those documents. It's not part of your job. In fact, I have serious doubts about your real intentions here." Marcus slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "Enough. Rachel is here under my authorization. She is investigating irregularities that I should have seen a long time ago. And those irregularities are putting this company's reputation, and more importantly, our customers' safety at risk." Edward leaned forward, his voice low but carrying a veiled threat. "Marcus, you are allowing a former cleaning lady, someone who clearly has personal reasons to discredit companies like ours, to cause internal panic days before the most important meeting of the year. The investors won't tolerate instability. If this story leaks, we lose the contract. $300 million. Are you willing to throw that away because of conspiracy theories?" Marcus held his gaze. "I am willing to ensure that we are not selling defective products that could put lives at risk. If that means delaying contracts, so be it." The silence that followed was heavy. The other 2 directors exchanged uncomfortable looks. Edward stood up abruptly from his chair. "You're making a mistake, Marcus. A mistake that will cost you dearly." He left the room, slamming the door. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision he had just made. Rachel remained silent, but when their eyes met, he saw something like gratitude. That night, Marcus stayed late at the office, reviewing the data Rachel had compiled by himself. Every number, every report, every inconsistency led him to an inevitable conclusion. There was systematic fraud, happening under his command. And he, in his obsession with results and efficiency, had been too blind to see it. Around 10 at night, Claire, his assistant, knocked on the door. She brought a cup of coffee and a worried expression. "Mr. Sterling, you should go home, rest." Marcus took the coffee, grateful. "I can't, Claire. I built this company from scratch, 30 years of work, and now I find out it might be founded on lies." Claire hesitated before speaking. "May I say something, sir?" Marcus gestured for her to continue. "I've worked here for 15 years. I've seen many things. I've seen how you treat people. I've seen the distance you keep, and I always thought it was just your way of leading. But in the last few days, I've seen something different. I've seen you listen. I've seen you doubt. And I've seen you do something I never thought I'd see, put people above profits." Marcus looked at her, surprised by her frankness. Claire continued, "Rachel isn't the only one who was once invisible to you. There are many of us. But perhaps she is the first one you truly saw. And that changed something." She left before Marcus could respond, leaving him alone with his thoughts. On Wednesday, the situation worsened. Rachel arrived at work and found an anonymous note on her desk. The words were direct and threatening. "Stop looking for trouble or you will find it. Think of your family." She felt her blood run cold. The mention of her family was no coincidence. Someone knew about her mother and her brother. Someone was willing to use that against her. Rachel took the note to Marcus. He read the words with a clenched jaw, anger rising in his chest. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice trembling with indignation. "I'm calling security. I'm going to find out who did this." Rachel shook her head. "If you make a scene, you'll scare whoever is behind this. They'll retreat, hide evidence, cover their tracks. We need concrete proof before we act." Marcus looked at her with genuine concern. "Rachel, this is becoming dangerous. Maybe it's time to involve the authorities." She took a deep breath. "Not yet. We're close to something big. I feel it. I just need a few more days." Marcus hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "But you don't do anything alone anymore. Any investigation, I go with you. And if anything at all threatens your safety, I stop everything immediately." That afternoon, they decided to review the company's digital systems. Rachel had noticed that reports digitized in recent months showed recent modification dates. Someone was retroactively altering files, erasing evidence of irregularities. With the help of the IT department, who answered directly to Marcus, they managed to access old system backups. What they found was devastating. Comparing old versions with current versions of the same reports, it was evident that data had been modified. Negative test results were changed to positive. Approval dates were moved up. Critical observations were deleted. And in every case, the user who made the modifications had the access credentials of Edward Sinclair. Marcus looked at the computer screen, feeling the world crumble around him. Edward wasn't just neglecting protocols. He was actively falsifying documents, covering up failures, and putting dangerous products on the market. "Why?" Marcus whispered, more to himself than to Rachel. "Why would he do this?" Rachel looked at the data with a somber expression. Maybe pressure to meet goals, maybe fear of disappointing you, maybe greed, or maybe he just stopped caring about the consequences as long as the numbers balanced. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility. "I created this environment. I pushed for results. I valued efficiency above all else. Maybe Edward only became what I encouraged." Rachel placed her hand on his shoulder, a surprisingly intimate gesture. "You are changing, Mr. Sterling, and that change will make a difference. But first, we need to stop more people from getting hurt." Marcus opened his eyes, renewed determination shining in them. "You're right. Let's gather all the evidence. Let's document everything. And at Friday's meeting, I'm going to expose this." On Thursday, one day before the crucial meeting, what Marcus feared most happened. A client called reporting a failure in one of the components supplied by Sterling Industries. The product had overheated during use, causing damage to the equipment. No one was hurt, but it was very close. The component was part of batch TP6847, one of the batches Rachel had identified as irregular. The news spread quickly through the company. Edward called an emergency meeting, trying to control the damage, claiming it was an isolated case, probably user error. Marcus listened to the explanations in silence, but inside, he felt a cold fury taking over. It was no longer just theory. It was no longer just numbers in reports. It was real. Someone almost got hurt because of negligence that happened under his roof. After the meeting, he summoned Edward for a private talk in his office. Just the two of them, no witnesses. Edward walked in with a defiant air, but Marcus saw the nervousness behind the facade. "Tomorrow is the meeting with the investors," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. "And I'm going to make a decision that will change the course of this company." Edward crossed his arms. "I hope it's the decision to move forward and close this contract. It's what any sensible leader would do." Marcus stood up, walked around the desk and stood face to face with Edward. "I know what you did. I have the proof. I have the system backups. I have the comparisons of the altered reports. I know you falsified documents, approved defective batches, and put profit above safety." Edward's face turned pale. "That's absurd. You're believing the theories of a resentful cleaning lady." Marcus took a step forward. "She is not a cleaning lady. She is a brilliant engineer who sacrificed her career to care for the people she loves. And she has more integrity in a single day than you have shown in years." Edward breathed heavily. "Marcus, think about what you're doing. If you expose this, the company will sink. Lawsuits, recalls, loss of trust. Everything we built will crumble." Marcus held his gaze without wavering. "Then we will rebuild, on a solid foundation this time. On truth, on respect, on responsibility." Edward realized he had lost. He left the office without saying anything else, his shoulders slumped, defeated. Marcus was left alone, looking out the window at the lit-up city below. Tomorrow everything would change. Tomorrow he would make the choice that would define who he really was. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus Sterling felt at peace with his decision. Friday dawned with a clear sky over New York, an ironic contrast to the storm that was about to break over Sterling Industries. Marcus arrived at the office before 7 in the morning, impeccably dressed in his favorite dark suit, but with deep dark circles under his eyes that gave away his sleepless night. He had spent hours reviewing documents, preparing his presentation and, more importantly, preparing himself emotionally for what he was about to do. Rachel arrived half an hour later. She was no longer wearing the cleaning uniform. Marcus had provided appropriate clothes for her to participate in the meeting as a technical consultant, a temporary title that reflected her true function. She wore a navy blue blazer over a white blouse, her hair down for the first time since Marcus had met her. She looked like a completely different person, but at the same time, exactly who she always was. The investors began to arrive at 9 o'clock. Representatives from Tanaka Corporation from Japan and Muller Industries from Germany. Men and women in suits, serious expressions, carrying leather briefcases and tablets. They were greeted with coffee and courtesy, led to the main conference room, which had a panoramic view of Park Avenue. Edward was there, greeting the investors with calculated smiles and firm handshakes. When he saw Rachel walk in with Marcus, his face contracted in an expression of poorly disguised fury, but he quickly composed himself. The meeting began punctually at 9:30. Marcus opened with the usual formalities, presenting the company, highlighting its 30-year history, the impressive revenue and growth figures. The investors listened with polite attention, taking notes, asking specific questions. After 40 minutes of technical and commercial presentation, Marcus paused. He looked at the projection screens, at the colorful graphs showing rising profits, at the expectant faces around the table. And then he looked at Rachel, who was sitting discreetly at the back of the room. She nodded almost imperceptibly, a gesture of encouragement. Marcus took a deep breath and said something no one expected. "Before we proceed to the signing of the contract, there is something I need to reveal to everyone present, something that compromises the integrity of this negotiation." The silence was immediate. Edward straightened up in his chair, his eyes wide. The investors exchanged confused looks. Marcus continued, his voice firm despite the nervousness he felt inside. "In the last 2 weeks, we conducted an internal investigation that revealed serious irregularities in our quality control processes. Products were approved without passing all necessary tests. Documents were falsified. Reports were retroactively altered to hide failures." The tension in the room became palpable. One of the Japanese representatives leaned forward. "Mr. Sterling, what exactly are you saying?" Marcus operated the remote control, changing the slides on the screen. Now side-by-side comparisons of technical reports appeared, before and after the alterations. I am saying that this company under my leadership allowed the pursuit of results to compromise the safety of our products. And I am here, before everyone, taking responsibility for these failures. Edward stood up abruptly. Marcus, you're crazy. This will destroy everything. Marcus turned to him, his gaze hard as steel. Sit down, Edward, or leave the room, but do not interrupt me. Edward hesitated, then sat down slowly, his face red with anger and humiliation. Marcus turned his attention back to the investors. I could have hidden this. I could have moved forward with this contract, secured the $300 million and dealt with the consequences later, if they ever came to light. But I can't do that. I can't look at you and promise excellence when I know there are cracks in the foundation. The German representative, a middle-aged woman with grey hair and a piercing gaze, spoke. Mr. Sterling, are you saying that the products presented to us are defective? Marcus nodded. Some specific batches show failures that were not properly documented or corrected. We have already initiated an internal recall process and are reviewing all products shipped in the last 2 years. This will cost millions. It will delay our production, and it will likely compromise our reputation in the short term. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. The investors exchanged looks, some expressing shock, others something like respect. It was Rachel who broke the silence. She stood up and walked to the front of the room, stopping next to Marcus. My name is Rachel Sullivan. I am a materials engineer. For the past few months, I worked in this company in a role that allowed me to observe internal processes. What I discovered was systemic. It wasn't an isolated error. It was a culture of shortcuts, of haste, of prioritizing deadlines over safety. She paused, looking at each investor. But what I also discovered, and this is important to emphasize, is a leader willing to change, willing to risk everything to do what is right. Mr. Sterling could have silenced me. He could have ignored the evidence, but he chose to act. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what differentiates a company with a future from a doomed company. The older Japanese representative, Mr. Tanaka, joined his hands on the table. Mr. Sterling, this is an extraordinary revelation, and disturbing. I need to consult with my colleagues. Marcus nodded. Of course, take as much time as you need. I will completely understand if you decide to end the negotiations. The investors retired to an adjoining room. Edward took the opportunity to confront Marcus. You just threw away $300 million, he said, his voice trembling with rage. You destroyed years of work. Why? Because of some reports, some questionable tests, a woman who appeared out of nowhere with conspiracy theories. Marcus turned to him, and for the first time, Edward saw something in his eyes that scared him. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment, because lives matter more than money, Edward. Because a reputation built on lies is worth nothing. And because I finally understood that the kind of leader I was, the kind you became, is exactly what is wrong with so many companies out there. Edward took a step forward, threateningly. You're going to regret this. Marcus didn't back down. I won't. For the first time in a long time, I won't. And as for you, Edward, you are suspended from your duties as of this moment. A formal investigation will be conducted. If the evidence we have is confirmed, you will be permanently dismissed. And if there is a legal basis, you will be held criminally responsible. Edward turned pale. You can't do this. I can, and I am. Security will escort you out of the building. You have 1 hour to collect your personal belongings. 2 security guards entered the room, clearly summoned beforehand. Edward looked from Marcus to Rachel, then to the guards. Realizing he had lost, he left the room with heavy steps, his shoulders slumped in defeat. After Edward's departure, the room fell silent. The other directors present seemed in shock. Rachel approached Marcus. You did the right thing, she said softly. Marcus let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I hope so, because if they back out, I don't know how we'll survive financially. 20 minutes later, the investors returned. Their faces were hard to decipher. Mr. Tanaka was the first to speak. Mr. Sterling, we have discussed your revelation at length. It is disturbing, without a doubt, but it is also in a way reassuring. Marcus frowned, confused. Reassuring? The German representative nodded. Yes, Because it shows that you are someone who values transparency over immediate profits, that you are willing to take responsibility for failures, and that you have the courage to correct the course even when it is costly," Mr. Tanaka continued. "However, we cannot simply ignore what was revealed. We need guarantees. We need a concrete restructuring plan. We need to see real changes in the quality control processes." Marcus nodded quickly. "All of that will be done. We have already started a complete review of the processes. I will hire external auditors to oversee the changes. I will implement protected reporting protocols for employees, and I will ensure that transparency is the new culture of this company." The investors looked at each other. Mr. Tanaka spoke again. "We will maintain interest in the contract, but with conditions. 6 months of implementation of the changes with quarterly audits. A 20% reduction in the initial contract value as compensation for the additional risk, and the hiring of Ms. Sullivan as a permanent quality consultant, reporting directly to a supervisory committee that includes our representatives." Marcus looked at Rachel. She seemed surprised but nodded. "I accept all conditions," Marcus said, "and I thank you for your trust, even given the circumstances." Mr. Tanaka stood up, extending his hand. "Trust is built with transparency, Mr. Sterling. Today you planted the seeds of that trust. We look forward to seeing the fruits." They shook hands. The meeting was concluded with the promise of a new contract, smaller but more solid, based on renewed principles. When everyone had left, Marcus and Rachel were alone in the conference room. He sat down heavily in one of the chairs, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. "You lost a lot of money today," Rachel said gently. Marcus smiled tiredly. "But I gained something more valuable. I gained integrity. I gained the chance to rebuild this the right way." Rachel sat down next to him. "And what happens now?" Marcus looked out the window at the city below. "Now we rebuild. We change the culture. We protect people, and we prove that it is possible to be successful without compromising values." He looked at her. "And you're going to help me. Not as a cleaning lady, not as a temporary consultant, but as the Director of Quality Control and Safety, with a fair salary, flexible conditions to care for your family, and the authority to stop any production that presents risks." Rachel felt her eyes well up. "Mr. Sterling, I don't know what to say. Say yes, and help me turn this place into something worthwhile." She reached out her hand. "Yes." They shook hands, sealing not just a professional agreement, but a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Outside, New York City continued its chaotic dance, but inside that room something had fundamentally changed, and that change was only beginning. 3 months had passed since that Friday that changed everything. Autumn had arrived in New York, bringing colder mornings and golden afternoons, and with it came deep changes at Sterling Industries. Changes that went far beyond new procedures or reshaped organizational charts. They were changes that touched the soul of the company, that altered the way people saw each other and the purpose of being there. Marcus was in his office, but the room looked different. The walls, once adorned only with certificates and corporate awards, now also displayed photographs of employees at celebratory events, frames with redesigned company values, and even drawings made by the children of some workers during a family integration day. He himself was different. His hair was still grey, but his face looked lighter, less tense. He smiled more. He listened more. Rachel knocked on the door and entered without ceremony. In the last few months, this closeness had become natural. She carried a folder with reports and a tablet. "Marcus, we have the numbers for the quarter," she said, sitting in the chair in front of the desk. "Productivity dropped initially as we expected, but it's already recovering. And most importantly, 0 quality incidents reported by customers in the last 10 weeks. Marcus took the tablet and reviewed the data. A satisfied smile formed on his lips. "This is exactly what I wanted to see. Quality over quantity. How are the employees?" Rachel opened the folder. "The organizational climate surveys show a 42% increase in general satisfaction. The flexible hours and expanded medical assistance programs are making a real difference in people's lives. And the protected reporting channel has already received 3 important alerts that prevented problems before they escalated." Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling a genuine satisfaction that had nothing to do with profits or corporate achievements. It was something deeper. It was the feeling of building something that mattered. "And you?" Marcus asked, looking at her attentively. "How is your mother?" Rachel's face lit up, and it was impossible not to notice the genuine joy in her eyes. "She's doing well, Marcus. Much better. With the health plan the company offers now, we got access to treatments that were impossible before. She's doing physical therapy 3 times a week and has regular follow-ups with specialists. The mobility in her hand has improved nearly 50%, and most importantly, she's smiling again. She has hope again." Rachel's voice broke slightly, emotional. "I can't thank you enough for what you did. Not just for me, but for her. For us." Marcus shook his head. "You don't need to thank me, Rachel. This is the minimum a company should do for its employees. Care for the people who dedicate their lives to the work. I only regret taking so long to understand that." There was a moment of comfortable silence between them. Then Rachel continued. "Luke, my brother, went back to school. He enrolled in a technical electronics course. He said he wants to work with technology, maybe pursue a career in the field. For the first time in years, he has plans. He has dreams." Marcus felt a warmth in his chest. "I'm happy for you all, and I want you to know that if you need any support for his studies, we are here." Rachel smiled. "You've changed, Marcus, you really have." He looked at her, considering the words. "I think I always had this in me. It was just buried under layers of ambition and ego. You helped me dig it out." It was at that moment that Claire, Marcus's assistant, rushed in. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation you need to see." Marcus and Rachel stood up, worried. "What?" Claire turned on the television mounted on the office wall. An economics news report was on, and the main story was about Sterling Industries. Marcus felt his stomach tighten, fearing the worst. But what they heard was surprising. The reporter spoke about how the company had become a case study in corporate transparency and social responsibility. She mentioned the voluntary product recall, the restructuring of quality processes, and the new well-being programs for employees. And more importantly, she highlighted how this was attracting new clients and partners who valued business ethics. Marcus and Rachel exchanged incredulous looks. Claire was smiling from ear to ear. "There's more," Claire said, switching channels. Another news station showed an interview with one of the Japanese investors, Mr. Tanaka, praising Marcus's courage and leadership. "We work with many companies around the world," Tanaka said in the interview, "but we rarely see a leader willing to sacrifice immediate profits to do what is right. This is not only morally admirable, it is also smart from a business perspective. Trust is the most valuable asset a company can have." Marcus turned off the television, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. "I never imagined this could have this kind of impact." Rachel placed her hand on his shoulder. "People are hungry for positive examples, Marcus, especially in a world where corporate scandals are so common. You offered something different. You offered hope." In the following weeks, the transformation deepened. Marcus began to do something he had never done in 30 years at the company. He started making regular visits to the different sectors, talking to employees at all levels. He met Maria, a 60-year-old woman who had worked in cleaning for 15 years and had fascinating stories about her family in South Carolina. He met Robert, a maintenance technician who had brilliant ideas for improving equipment efficiency, but had never had a channel to share them. He met Julia, an engineering intern who dreamed of developing sustainable materials. Each conversation opened Marcus's eyes to realities he had ignored. Each story further humanized his business vision. He created a program called Invisible Voices, where employees at any level could present ideas, suggestions, or concerns directly to the board. Many of the best innovations of the last few months came from this program. Rachel, for her part, was transforming the quality sector into a national benchmark. She implemented rigorous but fair protocols, trained teams, and created a culture of excellence without destructive pressure. More importantly, she became a mentor to young engineers, sharing not only technical knowledge, but also values of integrity and responsibility. One day, Marcus invited her to lunch outside the company. It was something they had started doing occasionally, a break from intense routines for deeper conversations. Sitting in a quiet restaurant on the Upper East Side, overlooking trees and leafy streets, they talked about the future. "I've been thinking," Marcus began, swirling the red wine in his glass, about legacy, about what we want to leave behind when we are no longer here. Rachel listened attentively. For years, Marcus continued, my legacy would have been just numbers, revenue, growth, market share. But now I see that's empty. The true legacy is the lives we touch, the people we help, the difference we make. He looked at her. And you taught me that, Rachel. Not with words, but with example. You sacrificed a brilliant career to care for those you love. You risked your job to protect people you would never meet. You showed me that courage isn't about control. It's about service. Rachel felt her eyes well up. Marcus, I only did what I thought was right. He smiled. And that is exactly what makes you extraordinary. You don't wait for recognition. You don't seek reward. You just act according to your values, even when it's hard. That is true leadership. They toasted, a silent toast to changes, to second chances, to deep transformations. That night, Rachel arrived home and found her mother, Alice, in the kitchen preparing dinner. The house was modest but cozy, in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, with the smell of home-cooked food and walls decorated with family photographs. Luke was in the living room, hunched over electronics books, completely focused. Alice turned around upon hearing Rachel enter, a wide smile on her face. Her right hand, once stiff and limited, could now hold a spoon with more firmness. Sweetie, you're home, Alice said, hugging her. How was your day? Rachel returned the hug, feeling deep gratitude. It was good, Mom. Very good. Luke looked up from his books. Sis, you won't believe it. I got a perfect score on the integrated circuits test. Rachel felt her heart fill with joy. I'm so proud of you, Luke. Keep it up. As they ate dinner together, talking about their days, sharing laughs and plans, Rachel realized something fundamental. She had back not only financial stability or access to medical care, she had back hope, the feeling that the future could be better, that sacrifices were not in vain, that kindness and courage still mattered. And it had all started with an encounter in a hallway, with the courage to speak when silence would have been safer, with the choice of a powerful man to listen instead of silencing her. Sometimes, Rachel thought as she watched her mother and brother, the greatest transformations start in the most unlikely places, and the most important people are those society teaches us to ignore. But she knew now with absolute certainty that invisibility was an illusion. Every person mattered. Every voice deserved to be heard. Every life had inestimable value, and that simple but profound truth was changing not just a company, but everyone who was part of it. Outside, New York City breathed under the stars, and inside that modest home in Brooklyn, a family was rebuilding dreams one day at a time. A year had passed since that day in the hallway. A full year of transformations, challenges, small and large victories, and lessons that had changed not just a company, but the lives of everyone who was part of it. New York City continued its chaotic dance, but inside Sterling Industries, something fundamental had changed forever. Marcus was on the 23rd floor again, walking down the same hallway where it all began. It was a Thursday morning, and he had asked Rachel to accompany him. She arrived punctually, wearing her usual navy blue blazer, a tablet under her arm. But there was something different about her too. A serene confidence, the posture of someone who knew her value and her place in the world. I wanted you to come with me, Marcus said, leading her down the hallway. There's something I need to show you. They stopped at the exact spot where a year ago Marcus had publicly humiliated Rachel, the place where she was cleaning the baseboard when he confronted her with contempt and arrogance. Marcus looked at the polished marble floor, remembering every cruel word he had said, every look of superiority he had cast. Do you know what I see when I look at this spot? Marcus asked, his voice thick with emotion. Rachel remained silent, waiting. I see the man I was. I see my arrogance, my blindness, my inability to see value in people who didn't fit my narrow vision of success. And I also see the moment everything started to change. The moment someone had the courage to confront me, not with anger, but with truth. He turned to her. You could have let me make that mistake. You could have watched silently while I destroyed the company and put lives at risk. But you chose to speak. You chose to take a risk. And in doing so, you saved not just contracts or a reputation. You saved who I could become. Rachel felt her eyes well up. Marcus, I only did what was right. He smiled. I know. And that is exactly what makes it all so extraordinary. Marcus took out a small framed plaque he had brought with him. It was made of polished metal with an inscription engraved on it. I want to install this here, in this exact spot, so that we never forget. Rachel read the inscription aloud, her voice trembling. In this hallway, on an ordinary day, a simple truth changed everything. No person is invisible. All work has dignity, and true leadership begins when power learns to listen. Marcus fixed the plaque to the wall, at the exact point where Rachel had been kneeling a year ago. This will stay here permanently, as a reminder, as a promise, as a legacy. Later that day, something happened that neither of them expected. A ceremony had been organized in the company's main auditorium. Marcus thought it would be just another quarterly alignment meeting, but when the doors opened, he found the auditorium packed. Employees from all sectors were there. Directors, technicians, cleaning staff, interns, veterans, all together. And on the stage, there were representatives from various business organizations and a delegation from the state government. Claire approached him, smiling. "Surprise, Mr. Sterling." Marcus looked around, confused. "What's happening?" One of the business representatives stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. "Mr. Marcus Sterling and Ms. Rachel Sullivan, please join us on stage." Marcus and Rachel exchanged perplexed looks but went up. The auditorium exploded in applause. The representative continued. "We are here today to formally recognize something extraordinary. Sterling Industries has become, in the last year, a national example of ethical transformation and corporate responsibility. Its employee well-being programs, its commitment to transparency and quality, and its culture of valuing all people, regardless of title or function, have set a new standard for the American industrial sector." He picked up a framed certificate. "On behalf of the National Association of Manufacturers, we have the honor of awarding Sterling Industries the Excellence in Social Responsibility and Ethical Innovation Award." The applause grew louder. Marcus accepted the award, but immediately held it out toward Rachel. "This isn't mine, it's ours, and more importantly, it belongs to every person who works here and who believed that change was possible." Rachel held the award along with him, and the image of the two of them, side by side, was captured by photographers and reporters present. But it wasn't the photo that mattered. It was what it represented. A billionaire businessman and a former cleaning lady, now a director, united not by hierarchy, but by shared purpose and mutual respect. After the ceremony, as people dispersed for a gathering, Marcus asked for a few minutes of attention. He stepped onto the stage again and the auditorium fell silent. "A year ago," he began, his voice firm but heavy with emotion, "I was a different man, a man who measured success in numbers, who saw people as replaceable parts in a machine, who believed that power meant control. I was wrong, deeply wrong." He paused, looking at the faces around him. "I saw a woman cleaning a floor in this company, and I thought she was unimportant. I thought her work was inferior. I thought her presence was a nuisance. And when I discovered she was an engineer, that she had sacrificed a brilliant career to care for those she loved, that she had knowledge that could save lives, I realized something fundamental." Marcus took a deep breath. "I hadn't seen an invisible person. I had become blind by my own arrogance, and it cost nearly destroying everything for me to finally open my eyes." He looked directly at Rachel. "Rachel Sullivan taught me that courage isn't about power. It's about doing what is right even when you have everything to lose. She taught me that dignity doesn't come from titles or salaries, but from how we treat one another. And she taught me that true leadership isn't about commanding. It's about serving." His voice broke slightly. "So I want to say, before all of you, thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me when I didn't even deserve a second chance. Thank you for believing that this company could be more than just profits. And thank you for reminding me every day that what we build together is worth infinitely more than anything I could have built alone." The silence was broken by applause that started shyly and grew into a standing ovation. Marcus stepped down from the stage and walked over to Maria, the 60-year-old cleaning lady he had met months ago. He reached out his hand. "Thank you for your work, Maria. Thank you for keeping this place running. You are essential." Maria shook his hand, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for finally seeing that, Mr. Sterling." And it was in that moment that Marcus fully understood. Transformation wasn't about grand gestures or public declarations. It was about these small, genuine moments where we recognize each other's humanity. Weeks later, Marcus was in his office reviewing the year's numbers. The company had grown, yes, but sustainably. New contracts had been signed based on a reputation for reliability and ethics. Employee turnover had dropped drastically. Productivity had increased not through pressure, but through genuine engagement. And most importantly, 0 serious quality incidents had been reported. Rachel entered with a report. We have the results of the quarterly external audit. Total approval in all categories. The investors are more than satisfied. Marcus smiled. And your mother? How is she? Alice is great. She's back to sewing, something she couldn't do for years. And Luke was accepted into a top university for engineering. He wants to follow in my footsteps, but in his own way. Marcus stood up and went to the window. Outside, New York City stretched as far as the eye could see. Millions of people, millions of stories, millions of interconnected lives. Do you know what I realized, Rachel? He said without taking his eyes off the city. For years I looked at this view and saw only business opportunities. I saw buildings, not people. I saw numbers, not lives. But now I see it differently. I see families like yours struggling to survive and thrive. I see invisible workers who keep the city running. I see human potential wasted by prejudice and indifference. He turned to her. And I see that I have a responsibility, not just to shareholders or contracts, but to every person who trusts their livelihood, their dignity, and their future to this company. Rachel approached him. You are living according to that responsibility, Marcus. Every day. He smiled. I'm trying. And having you by my side makes it easier not to forget why it matters. Months turned into years. Sterling Industries consolidated its reputation as a model company. Other organizations began to copy its employee evaluation programs. Universities invited Marcus and Rachel for lectures on ethical leadership. And more importantly, lives continued to be transformed. The video of that humiliation in the hallway, which could have destroyed Marcus's reputation, became corporate training material. Not to shame him, but to illustrate how structural prejudices manifest and how transformation is possible when leaders choose humility over ego. And in that hallway on the 23rd floor, employees stopped daily to read the plaque. Some took photos, others simply stood in silence, reflecting. The plaque had become a symbol that change was possible, that voices could be heard, and that dignity was non-negotiable. On a quiet afternoon, Marcus and Rachel were in that hallway again. She had just returned from an international conference on industrial safety, where she had presented the protocols developed at Sterling Industries. Do you realize, Marcus said, looking at the plaque, that it all started here in this exact spot, with you kneeling, cleaning a floor, and me being too arrogant to see what was right in front of me? Rachel looked at the marble floor. And do you realize that if it weren't for that moment, my mother would still be suffering without proper treatment, my brother would still be lost, and I would still be invisible? Marcus shook his head. You were never invisible, Rachel. I was the one who was blind. They stood there in silence as employees passed by, greeting them, not as boss and subordinate, but as people who had learned together that hierarchies were illusions, that human value had no title, and that seemingly insignificant encounters could reveal truths capable of transforming entire worlds. Outside, New York City continued its eternal dance. But inside that tower of glass and steel, in a hallway that had witnessed both contempt and redemption, remained a simple but profound truth. No person is invisible. All work has dignity, and true greatness is not found in how much power we accumulate, but in how many lives we touch with respect, compassion, and the courage to change. And that truth, born of humiliation and transformed into wisdom, would continue to echo far beyond those walls, inspiring others to see, to listen, and to value every human being who crossed their paths. Because in the end, the most valuable empire we can build is not made of steel or concrete. It is made of restored dignity, renewed hopes, and transformed lives. And that, Marcus and Rachel had learned, was a legacy that no number in any report could ever measure. The end, dear listeners. We hope the story of Marcus and Rachel has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, humility, and redemption, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it Rachel's courage in confronting power? Was it Marcus's transformation in recognizing his mistakes, or was it the message that no one is invisible and that every life has inestimable value? Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and remind us that change is always possible when we choose courage over silence.